ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Tibet Awareness Talk Series. Since February 2009, 135 Tibetans have self-immolated, and of this number, 116 had died, whereas the whereabouts and condition of those who survived remain unknown. All the self-immolators are calling for the return of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to Tibet and freedom for Tibetan. To learn why those Tibetans, mostly young and healthy, are taking drastic steps like self-immolation, and to know their aspiration and the current situation inside Tibet, we have invited Mr. Jampa to speak on a topic, the question related with Tibetan self-immolation protests in Tibet. Mr. Jampa was born in Tibet, and he escaped to India in 1993 at the age of 14. He later he graduated with a bachelor degree in 2005 and master degree in economics in 2007 from Punjab University. He joined Central Tibetan Administration in 2008 and has been working at the Tibet Policy Institute as a research fellow and translator. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Mr. Jampa.
Hello, I'm Tashpile. Actually, the topic that I'm going to explain to you today is not anything Tashpile in Tibetan. And by the way, whenever I talk about Tibetan self-immolation protest, I deliberately make use of this particular word, protest. I do not define the self-immolation as an act itself. In my opinion, self-immolation is a way of protest. So I use the self-immolation as an adjective or adverb to describe the protest. So whatever self-immolation topic comes, whenever we hear news of Tibetan self-immolation protests happening in Tibet, we are more or less very much worried, and so many uncomfortable as well as inevitable questions come to our mind. And most of the questions are very much complex and difficult to answer. And some of them are here. And one of them is that why not by other means? Why do they have to self-immolate? Why not protest by some other means? And why from 2009? Actually, we have been under Chinese operation since 1950s, early 50s. And till now, it is more than around 60 years. Why from 2009 self-immolation protest has started happening? And then there's a debate that self-immolation protest is a social movement or is it political movement? There has to be some kind of explanation on this topic as well. Then there's one very evident appearance that self-immolation has happened mostly in traditional Tibetan Amdo regions and Kham regions. Why hasn't it happened in Tibetan Uyghur and the central regions? Then, of course, Chinese government claimed that the self-immolation protests are violent and terrorist acts. Is it really self-immolation protests are violent and terrorist acts? Some explanation has to be given on this as well. Then, with so many self-immolation protests has already happened, more than 130, and I believe it is around 134 or 5. So has it yielded any result, or has it generated some impact on the global arena? And then, in case self-immolation has to be stopped, because it is too drastic and too unbearable to even to hear the news. Who has the power and how can it be stopped? These questions definitely need to be answered, and sometimes in our everyday conversations with our friends and family, we come across these questions, and sometimes we find it quite difficult and uncomfortable to give our own personal clear views. So, firstly, I try to deal with the first question, why not by other means? Actually, since Chinese occupation of Tibet, since early 1950s, till date, till self-immolation started happening in Tibet, Tibetans have tried different ways of protest, like shouting and organize a demonstration in the market, in the streets, particularly from early 1987 and 88 and 1989, then till 2009. We Tibetans in Tibet have conducted a lot of protests by peaceful means. Still, the Chinese response was brutal military crackdown on those protests, and their response, instead of listening to the grievances of the Tibetan protesters, they have adopted some kind of drastic measures, and so many Tibetans have been imprisoned and killed. And some of those Tibetan political prisoners' photos are displayed here, and so many Tibetan ex-politicals have recorded their past experience in the form of books and in documentary films, which are very much widespread in the free countries. So these are very clear indication that self-immolation protests as a way of expressing grievances against the Chinese rule is some kind of drastic, some kind of desperation. So with this regard, Kinti Rinpoche was of the view that Tibetan self-immolation is kind of protest which is forced onto the Tibetans by the Chinese policies, because Chinese government imposed some kind of patriotic re-education in the monasteries, and I heard that this policy is being applied in some schools as well these days. So this policy particularly restricted monastery community and the school students to come in a particular classroom like this one, and they were told to denounce their religious figures, religious leaders, as well as their own religion, particularly with specific mention of the Dalai Lama's name, and they were ordered to, they were told that you have to denounce Dalai Lama and his teachings are against Buddhism, and all these kind of derogatory claims are made. So this makes the nomadic community, monastery community their life very suffocating. So Kinti Rinpoche, while giving his presentation to the United USA Congress, he said that this type of education being forced onto the on the monks and nuns in Tibet is neither patriotic nor respecting their own religion. It is some kind of repressive policy being imposed by the government of China on the monks. So this is sometimes pushing the Tibetan people inside Tibet to look for some kind of alternative way of protesting, which for lack of other methods or resources, they are self-immolating. Then another Chinese scholar, Li Jianglin, she is USA-based Chinese scholar, and she's an authoritative writer on Tibetan contemporary history. And she has written an article in which she said that Chinese administration or government is viewing the whole of Tibetan community as an enemy group. In that article, she has stated that Chinese government has been so used to their way of implementing policies with class divisions, class struggles, that they do not see, or they pretend that they do not see, that Tibetans are very religious people, and that for them the Dalai Lama is their own life and their own spiritual leader, and denouncing the Dalai Lama and telling the people that the Dalai Lama is a wolf in the monk's robe and he's a demon. By stating this, she believes that the Chinese government is looking at the whole Tibetan community as an enemy group, or Chinese government is imposing or making the Tibetans to see itself as an enemy of the Tibetans. In this way, the Chinese government itself is creating the frictions between Tibetan people and the government. Then, on democratically elected leader Sijun Lobsa Singh, in one of his articles on Wall Street Journal, he has stated that to understand this act refer to self-immolation protest. It is crucial to note that within China, there is no room for freedom of speech and conventional forms of protest. A participant in a simple demonstration runs a high risk of arrest, torture, and even death. It is definitely true. We Tibetans have no conventional forms of protest that we haven't experimented with. So, self-immolation, in a sense, is the last resort that we have come to now. Then, okay, all sentient beings, it is included human beings and other animals walking on all four limbs, all have emotions, and they express the emotions through their physical expression as well as verbal expressions. When we get angry or afraid, our faces show some kind of uncomfortable expression, like right now that I'm showing because I'm a little bit nervous. And when somebody is angry, they shout, and anyway, everybody, including animals, express their emotions through verbal as well as physical expressions. So Tibetans have no other options to express their feelings. So they resort to some other artistic ways of expression, like writing emotional poems, singing emotional songs. As far as I have been in exile for more than 20 years, and I have been listening to Tibetan songs, the songs that come from Tibet are the most melodious and very emotional, very touching songs. Why? Because the songs that they sing from Tibet are very touching to us, and they are writing and singing the songs with their real emotion. So, one Tibetan particular singer, Tashi Gyunru, firstly, in his song, he has stated that Chinese rule is a torture that leaves no scars visible. And in his that particular song, he has counted that firstly, families are divided between exile and those in Tibet. And in Tibet, there is no harmony between nationalities or ethnic groups like Han Chinese and Tibetans. And for Tibetans, there is no freedom in their own land. And these are the tortures that leave no scars to the Tibetans, particularly in their heart. Then, Tibetans' ancestral wells are being taken out of Tibet to Chinese land, and the Tibetans' natural resources are not owned by the Tibetan, but by the Chinese government and their mineral exploiting companies. And Tibetan women are forced to go through birth controls. So these are, in a way, torture that leaves no scars. So for singing this particular song, he was, in 2009, he was arrested by the government of China, imprisoned for 14 months, 1 year and 2 months in prison. No sooner he was released in 2011, February, he sang another song. That particular song is No Regrets. In that song, he has sang that I have a very unbearable pain that I'm missing my root guru, the Dalai Lama. And for this particular expression of remembering my root guru, I may get killed by the government of China. Still, I will express this feeling to all people of Tibet. Right now, I don't know what has happened to him, but definitely it's going to be a huge disaster for him. Still, he is able to face this kind of challenge. Then in 2012 November, the provincial as well as the district level leaders came to the local leader and asked the local communist secretary, why at your place, so many Tibetans are resorting to self-immolation protest. What is going through their mind? Why they are self-immolating? They asked the particular Tibetan party secretary. His name is Jagla. And he said, he had replied that I did not know what was going through the minds of Tibetan people, local Tibetan people. But he had replied that, in my view, it is because that no Tibetans are allowed to display the pictures of the Dalai Lama in their homes and on their altars. And the Dalai Lama is forced to live in exile. And the young Tenzin Lama is imprisoned behind the bars. And the Tibetan language do not have Tibetan language is being pushed aside in favor of the Chinese language. So on these reasons, Tibetans are self-immolating in protest against Chinese rule. These are my views. This is a very candidate and a very precise summarization, I believe. Then comes to the second question: why self-immolation protests started happening since 2009? Actually, we Tibetans have more than 2,000 years of recorded history, and in this period, we had different rulers, and they ruled Tibet according to their prosperity, and the condition of the Tibet and prosperity of Tibet altered according to their rules. Still, till recent years, no Tibetan has ever self-immolated or protested against their own rulers. Only it was with Chinese arrival Tibetans started protesting against the rulers, as well as adopted to self-immolation protest. Actually, Tibetan self-immolation protests, the first self-immolation protest happened on Indian soil. It happened in 1998 April in New Delhi. Tibetan Youth Congress organized an unto death hunger strike in New Delhi in protest against Chinese rule in Tibet. And the hunger strike protest was going through the 49th day, and took them to one particular Tibetan who was at that time serving the hunger strikers, and he was in the next standby candidate going to participate in the hunger strike. The Indian government deployed police officers to stop the hunger strikers from further protests, and they were going to be taken to hospital for medication. Took them to emerge from nearby bathroom, immersed in flames, shouting slogans that China should get out of Tibet, and the Dalai Lama should return to Tibet. That is the first case of Tibetan self-immolation protest against Chinese rule. This happened on Indian soil. Then the most notable Tibetan protest against Chinese rule happened in 1987, 88, 89. These happened mostly in Lhasa. In those demonstrations, there were some foreign participants as well, Tibet supporters. But on those protests, during those protests, Chinese government deployed not only military personnel, but they shot tear gas. Even military tanks were deployed in the main Lhasa square, and so many were killed that it is quite difficult to tell how many Tibetans died in those demonstrations. But that in those protests, so many Tibetans were imprisoned and killed that many of them were later able to come to India and go to other Western countries. And they have formed a Guchusum Tibetan political movement here. It is all organized. This particular organization is formed by ex-political prisoners mainly from those demonstrations. Then in 1997, Sertalarung and Amdo region, Amdomawa region of Tibetans, they demonstrated against Chinese rule, and in the local school, the Chinese flag was hoisted in the school campus. Those demonstrators took down the Chinese national flag, and instead they hoisted Tibetan national flag. In that particular demonstration, again Chinese administrators or rulers deployed a lot of Chinese security officials, and the local Tibetans were tortured a lot. Then comes the next, 2008 Pan Tibet. Actually, the earlier demonstrations happened only in regional locations, but the 2000 protests, just around the Dalai Lama received the gold medal award from the US Congress. In 2008, the demonstration initially started in Lhasa with the initiative of the Debu monastery monks. Then it spread in the whole Lhasa region, and then it gradually spread to some other regions of Tibet, including Amdo and Kham regions. It becomes the most widely spread demonstration against Chinese rule. In those demonstrations, a lot of Tibetans were killed. Though I cannot I do not have the exact number of Tibetans killed, but last year, Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Development has received some kind of mortuary report or some kind of post-mortem report. In that report, it is clearly depicted that a lot of Tibetans were killed with gunshots. Then, again, when we look at why the self-immolation protest started from 2009, we have to look at the situation of Amtungawa region in 2008, because of the self-immolation protest at each corner and in front of each entry gate, military barracks were built, and on those barracks, machine guns were placed, and Chinese soldiers were ready to fire at any moment. On those days, the monks of the Gili monastery were not allowed to go out of the monastery, and the Tibetan local devotees were not allowed to go into the monastery to visit the monastery, as well as their relatives in the monasteries. So on some days as well, the Chinese stopped water supply as well as electricity supply in the monastery. So the situation on those days was so tense that a lot of people have described the situations like a new some sort of a culture similar to cultural revolution. Then in 2009, in Amdo region, there was a debate that the Amdo region, the New Year of the Amdo region, should be celebrated on the same date with the Lhasa, the Central Tibet region Lhasa New Year, because traditional Amdo region, this New Year Amdo region is 1.5 months before the New Year of the Central Tibetan regions, and their New Year coincide with the New Year of the Chinese New Year. So the Amdo people believed or that they were of the opinion that we have to celebrate our own New Year with the Central Tibetan people, and so that we are all Tibetans, and we should not celebrate with our New Year with the Chinese. There was this debate, and the Tibetans have themselves decided that they were not going to the Chinese New Year, their traditional New Year, which coincided with the Chinese New Year. So they boycotted the New Year that comes first. So when they were celebrating the traditional Tibetan New Year, which was more or less common to whole region of Tibet, the Chinese government deployed military personnel in their region and asked them that you are not supposed to celebrate Tibetan New Year. This is not your New Year. Your New Year has already passed. Then on New Year, Tibetan monasteries used to organize grand prayer festival, Malam Chemo. Kiti monastery monks gathered together on their monastery by the gate of their monastery hall to celebrate or conduct that grand prayer festival. The Chinese authorities came and they were restricted entry into the monastery hall. Said that your Malam Chemo or the grand prayer date is already expired. You are not supposed to hold it here today. Then the monks were forced to disperse, and then within half an hour, that monk Tabi, the first Tibetan self-immolation protester, went into the streets of Ngaba and carrying a national flag, which he himself had wrote on a piece of cloth, and carrying the image of the Dalai Lama in flames. He was running in the streets and he died on the spot. He died in that protest. So then I believe what then follows is a natural development. Actually, in 2000, I forgot to tell you one thing, that in 2008, the situation in Kirti and the Ngaba region was so tense that in 2008 itself, more than 30 monks committed suicide. These were not included in the self-immolation protest. They committed suicide. As far as I remember, 2 or 3 monks jumped into the river after that they were being chased by Chinese soldiers, and they jumped into the river and died in the river. These are the 3 individuals I remember. But one very reliable source told me that more than 30 Tibetan monks committed suicide. Then the discussion comes to this, that self-immolation protest that is happening in Tibet, is it a social or political movement? And one of our own community intellectual, very highly esteemed, he has written an article, Self-immolation of Buddhism. In that particular article, he was of the opinion that he has written that there in our community, so many people are expressing that Tibetan monks and nuns in Tibet did not have religious freedom, so that they are self-immolating in protest against Chinese rule. He was of the view that if Tibetans inside Tibet did not have religious freedom, they should have escaped to India. In India, we have established a lot of monastery communities. They can enjoy freedom of religious practices here in India. It is not a purely a religious issue. He was of the view, and even he has analyzed that Tibetans in Tibet, when they are self-immolating, they have shouted that Dalai Lama should be allowed to return to Tibet. He was of the view that those Tibetans shouting these particular slogans not because they were asking that their root guru to come back to Tibet and give them religious discourses. They were asking the Chinese government to allow their own independent Tibet, ruler of independent Tibet, to come back to Tibet, to an independent Tibet and rule the country. So this is, in a sense, that he was of the view it is some kind of political issue. And another Tibetan writer, he, in this particular article, this Chinese writer about Tibetan self-immolation, he was of the view that Tibetan self-immolation protest would become a very serious social problem for the government of China if this is not taken care of by the concerned officials seriously, because it is going to affect the social harmony of China in the future. Whatever there are some different interpretations, and all these previous two interpretations are right in their own right ways. But when I interviewed one of the 50 monastery monks who is based here at Jampa, he told me that it is not purely some kind of political issue as well as a social issue, or it is neither purely an issue of those kind of Tibetan language issue or some kind of patriotic education. He was of the view that it is composed of many issues. He was telling me that Tibetan population can be mostly divided into two groups, nomads and farmers. And the Chinese government, what Chinese government is telling the Tibetan farmers that your way of cultivation is harming the environment. So you should stop your cultivation and farming activities. And they were compensated a small amount of money, and their lands were confiscated as far as from my home village in Tibet. Earlier, before I came from Tibet, at the time I was 14 years, around that 14 years age. At that time, my family was a farming family, agriculture. My sisters used to go to the field to water the field, to harvest, and all these activities were doing. These days, when I make a phone call to Tibet, to my sisters, they tell me that these days they do not have any farmland. They are totally jobless. The government took away all the land, and they are totally jobless. And though we receive some amount of money, this money is going to finish within 2 or 3 years. Now we are totally jobless. So Tibetan farmers' land are being confiscated by the government of China with a very small amount of money in compensation. But then what Chinese government is telling the Tibetan nomads is that in the name of ecological resettlement, Tibetan nomads are told that you should stop your traditional way of life, because your way of farming or that migrating from one place to another, taking their own cattle, is degrading. That Tibetan schools should be taught in Tibetan language and the textbook should be in Tibetan. But these days, what is happening is that Tibetan language is sidelined, and the school students are being taught only in Chinese language, and the textbooks are all in Chinese, only the Tibetan language textbooks. So now, from all angles, Tibet is being some kind of Sinonized or converted into Chinese. And earlier I have heard that in a particular Chinese university, if in a year 50 Tibetan students are admitted in a higher education institution, these days around 15 Tibetans are admitted in a high study institution. And from those 15 Tibetan students admitted in these universities and colleges, only 3 Tibetan students are allowed to sit in the same classrooms. This is a tactical move by the Chinese government, I believe, because they were trying to, in case in a classroom of 100 students in a college, if there are only 3 Tibetans, it means that the Tibetans will have to mingle with the Chinese and they have to get the qualities or attributes of the Chinese students, and the Tibetan is gradually going to decline. As I mentioned earlier, in 1987 and 1889, those protests happened mainly in Lhasa region of Tibet. And after those demonstrations, Lhasa is right now totally, more or less, we can say that it is under military rule. Because in the streets of Lhasa, there are more Chinese security personnel than civilians. Because many Chinese soldiers are in uniform, as many others are in civilian clothes. So it is quite difficult to make out who is Chinese soldiers. And also, as you have noticed that in the Lhasa streets, there are so many surveillance cameras, and it's quite difficult. It makes the local Tibetans movement very difficult. In my parents' days in Lhasa, the Debu monastery used to have around 7,700 monks, and the Sera monastery used to have 5,500 monks, and the Gandhen monastery used to have 3,300 monks. But these days, in Lhasa, the Sera monastery has only around 300 monks. These monks are not engaging in some kind of Buddhist serious studies. They are just like caretaker of the monasteries. Whenever visitors or tourists come to the monasteries, they have to take care of the tourists and show them around the places. So the monks are deprived of religious studies. So Kiddi monastery, why Kiddi monastery in Kiddi region and Amdangao region, there are so many self-immolation protests are happening, is because that these monastery monks know that Tibetan, those great seeds of learning in Lhasa have been more or less converted into some sort of museum or tourist spot, and they are not allowed to carry out serious Buddhist studies. So the Kiddi monastery monks believe that in order to avoid their monastery's fate to not become like the Sera, their Debu monasteries, so they have started protesting against Chinese rule. This is another reason I do believe. Then another thing is that Kiddi monastery monk Wen Pinzong, that particular monk, after self-immolating, his aunt and uncle were implicated by the Chinese government that they have murdered Wen Pinzong, and they were sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. This has generated so much resentment in the heart of local Tibetans that from then on, self-immolation protests have been happening in Amdo region more often than in other regions. Then another thing is that so many Tibetan self-immolating protesters have left behind large fields, and so many of them have shouted slogans. None of them have expressed that they were, as Chinese government said, incited or instigated by the exiled Tibetans or the Dalai Lama. Instead, they have blamed that the Chinese oppressive policies. I'm sorry, now I have to. Government adamantly said that the Tibetan self-immolation protests are violent acts and terrorist acts. Okay, it can be subject to any interpretations. And my interpretation is that it can be analyzed from two different angles. One is from political point of view. From political point of view, Mahatma Gandhi, globally considered as the beacon of freedom, or beacon of non-violence, or the campaigner of non-violence. Mahatma Gandhi, in one of his statements, has stated that there may flow a river of blood before we achieve freedom, but this blood should be of our own, not of our enemy. From this statement, I do believe that Gandhiji is of the view that sacrifices should be made to regain one's own freedom and rights. But while we are struggling for our own freedom and rights, we should not harm our own enemy, the so-called enemy, though we do not consider Chinese as our enemy. But we should not harm the other side of the other people. But we have to make sacrifice from our own side. This is what Gandhiji says. And Gandhiji, being the global leader or accepted talisman of the peace campaign, so I do believe this stands true. In one of his statements, the Dalai Lama has stated that it is hard to differentiate acts on the basis of mere appearance. If an act is carried out with an evil motivation, it is violent, even if it appears to be harmless in appearance. On the other hand, if an act is undertaken with sincere motivation, it can be called an act of non-violence, even if it involves some violence in doing it. This is also true because earlier on some other occasion I have gone to Tibetan schools to explain it. When I went there, I took the example that in schools or in our homes, our parents and our teachers used to beat us sometimes. Though corporal punishment in school these days are banned, but I do believe corporal punishment with sincere motivation is helpful. As for me, I do find it is very helpful because teachers used to beat us and force us to go outside class and kneel down in front, keep there kneeling. These punishments sometimes make us realize that what I went wrong. This though looks like violent, but the teachers and the parents' motivation was pure and motivation to help the child. So I do believe this is helpful. Then another Chinese writer, or Tang Baojiao, he has expressed one very interesting view that he believed that in Tibetan self-immolation protest, the Tibetans were harming themselves, not other persons. But why they are self-immolating? Their intention is to help other people or the wider society to get better. So when they were self-immolating for the benefit of others, do we have the right to comment to say that they are carrying out some kind of violent or non-violent act? We do not have that kind of particular rights because they were doing it with their sincere motivation for the society to change to better. And then in retrospect, he had asked, then if in human history there are no people like them, do we have the human civilization that we have inherited? He meant to say that in human history there are so many people who have sacrificed a lot so that we are enjoying the civilization that we have. Then from Buddhist point of view, Robert Thuman, one of Western Tibetan Buddhist scholar, he was of the view that Tibetan self-immolation protests are true non-harming, perfect resistance by complete surrender. And then C.U. Lobsang Singh is, in one of his articles, he has stated that what is absolutely clear, however, is that these protesters intended to avoid harming anyone other than themselves. This stands true because Tibetan self-immolation protesters, when they have decided that they were going to self-immolate in protest against Chinese rule, they definitely have 1 or 2 days before they self-immolate themselves. Within these 2 or 3 days, they definitely could have killed or harmed some kind of notorious Chinese leaders or Chinese communist cadres. None of them had done that. While even they were burning, they never had tried to grab one Chinese and let the Chinese person to burn with them, or at least inflict some kind of injury to them. None of them had done that. Because in common sense, if their intention was to harm other people, they definitely had the opportunity. None of them so far done that. Even my personal view is that Tibetan self-immolation protesters, when they were doing self-immolation protests, they had the feeling of some kind of pity and sympathy to the Chinese rulers. Because Sherpa Gyop and Sonam, these 2 individuals self-immolated together. They were friends and they self-immolated together. These 2 individuals left behind a note in which they have written that after our death, after our self-immolation attempt, our dead body are surely going to be taken by the Chinese authorities. So local Tibetans should not fight for our bodies, fight for the position of our bodies. Let the Chinese government take away our bodies. So from this, what is clear is that they were ready to sacrifice anything. And another thing is that Ritu is not older than me. Actually, she's a very young woman, and she's a mother of 3 children, small children. And she had left behind a note again, in that she had expressed that after my self-immolation protest, I happen to remain alive, and the Chinese government or authorities take position of my body, or in case she was not dead, take position of me. Your local villagers do not fight with them. Let them do whatever with me. She had mentioned like that. So from this, I do believe that Tibetan self-immolation protesters did not have the slightest intention of harming Chinese or any other person other than themselves, and even they did have very sort of compassionate sympathy to the Chinese ruler. Why you are doing to us like this? Then, in Tibet, we Tibetans are very devout Buddhists, and whatever we try to explain with the yardstick of Buddhist doctrine. So, in the lives of Buddha, in Sutra and all these texts, there are many stories where in the earlier lives of the Buddha, he had sacrificed his own life for the benefit of other sentient beings. In this particular story, Kunda, the wildlife Kunda is a wild animal, and I don't know whether I have to tell the story or not. I hope I will be able to make it short, because earlier in one of earlier lives, the Buddha happened to born in the form of an animal, wild animal, like deer or like this wild animal, and at a place called Varanasi, maybe the present Varanasi. The king of Varanasi happened to be a cruel king. One night he slept, and the next morning, in his dream, he saw a very attractive animal, and he just desired to have the girl. That if Tibetan religious figures have the authority to stop them, then they would have appealed earlier. So for till date, they haven't done it. Then is it that we are, with no religious figure were willing to appeal the Tibetans inside to stop self-immolation protests, then are we trying to encourage or support further self-immolation bids? But I personally don't think that none of us in exile wish many more Tibetans self-immolate in Tibet and die for Tibet. Though their acts were definitely an act of some kind of patriotism, still we do not wish them to die for Tibet right now. We need more live Tibetans than dead Tibetans. Because China, in another article I have seen that a writer has written that Chinese government fear more to the living Tibetans than the dead ones.